What job makes the most amount of money for the least amount of work? Sometimes in big, fast-growing, fast-moving companies, you can end up in a random work-from-home job that pays great, and you literally do nothing all day. I think people even forget you are there. It's a strange artifact of the current world we live in, and I can't imagine it lasting forever, but I know a guy who had one of these jobs and was able to also do basically full-time freelance work at the same time that he collected a full-time paycheck and benefits. It lasted for about 2 years until somebody wised up and cut him loose. I'm not sure what's more impressive, actually, his ability to get 2 full-time jobs done or his company's ability to not notice he was a ghost in the machine. And before I forget, other me's over on Rufus Stories doing what he does best, unpacking some crazy relationship stories. It's a good time, I promise. Links in the description if you're down. All right, back to the stories. Story 2. I became a webcam model when I was 21. I never did anything inappropriate. I didn't even talk. All I did was just sit there and pretend to laugh at people who talked to me. I was in school at the time to be a therapist, so I was good at talking to people, and I would make about $500 an hour. It was sad though, lots of lonely people out there. A majority of my customers were men who would get off of work and come home and then go talk to webcam models so they didn't feel like they were alone. But I stopped doing it because people get obsessive, and it wasn't safe after I had a run-in with a stalker, but that's a whole other story. Story 3. I remember reading here about someone who got hired by a large corporation to work on a team, and when he arrives for work, the office is empty, but he thinks, okay, must be a work-from-home day. Turns out his whole team had gotten let go. Apparently, his paperwork hadn't made it to the unit that decided to let the team go. So he just sat there in his cubicle for a few months doing his own thing when he posted about it. At the time of the post, he still had his job and was wondering how long it would last. No idea about the eventual outcome. Story 4. I was a radar testing engineer at Raytheon for most of a year. Got paid about $65,000 a year to sit there and watch YouTube. Occasionally, I'd look up at a wall of blinking lights and make sure they were all blinking, then nod, then look at a wall of not blinking lights and make sure they were all not blinking, then nod, then go back to YouTube. If any light was doing what it wasn't supposed to, the order of operations was 1. Sad head shake, 2. Tut-tut, bad test, 3. Run the one-line script to turn it off, 4. Pull the massive power levers to turn it off, 4B, optional, declare pull the lever, cronk, 5. Wait a minute, 6. Pull the massive power levers to turn it on. 6B, optional, declare pull the lever, cronk. 7. Run the one-line script to turn it on. 8. Check the lights. And that's it. That's all I did. People at work were expressing their jealousy of me because it was one of the golden goose positions that I'd gotten as a not-quite-college new hire. So-called because it's a low-effort job that scales its pay well over time, and short of committing literal treason, you can stay in that post until retirement. At first, I joked around with them, but 6 months in, I had to put on a fake smile and keep myself from saying, yeah, it's a great job that's so completely and utterly meaningless that each day I find fewer and fewer reasons not to drive my car straight into the barriers on my drive to and from work. So I quit, got a master's degree in video game programming, and got a job working on literally my favorite title. Story 5. I work as a client services director in the market research industry. This is a 6-figure job that mostly involves emails and phone calls, highly recommended. I also worked as a professional chef for over 12 plus years. This is hard work that will wreck your body, knees, sleep patterns, social life, and temperament. The pay sucks. The benefits are non-existent. Hollywood spins this as romantic. It's not. Avoid. In my experience, an art director, my mother is an artist and graphic designer, is fairly low stress. These people can make a very good living if working in marketing or graphic design. My wife is a school teacher. This job frickin' sucks. Long hours, thankless, garbage pay, constant disrespect, emotional turmoil, and the pay sucks. Avoid. I would say being a musician is the easiest job. My grandfather was an acoustic guitar maker, Spanish folk musician, and instructor. He made a great living and traveled the world. He passed away in a nice house playing guitar, peaceful and easy life. My 2 cousins and their mother are also musicians and have a good living off their musical talent. One of these cousins played on a few records as a session player and has been getting steady checks for decades. His mother sang background vocals on a few songs and likewise has collected checks for years without any further effort. The downside is being a musician is a dime a dozen. You need luck, talent, persistence, or a combination of each to make a decent wage off music. But it is the easiest in terms of labor. Story 6. In the tech industry, the easiest job would likely be a scrum master for a team of even semi-competent developers. You run a couple of meetings a day where you ask a series of cookie-cutter questions, move a couple of cards on a Jira board, and then log off. If the developers aren't brand new, they figure out their own blockers anyway. After that, it's probably a solution architect. You just take a list of requirements and draw up some incomprehensible architectural diagrams using at least 3 new technologies that are 10 years ahead of where the developers actually operate. You drop it in on them like you would a microphone at the end of a rap battle and then moonwalk out of the team call. Story 7. I'm a project manager for a company that doesn't seem to want anything a project manager can do, aside from scheduling meetings and occasionally finding things they can't. I don't even have to take notes anymore because I convinced them to let me use a transcriber on every call. I'm getting really good at chess and starting to learn Spanish in my spare time, of which I have plenty. I am constantly paranoid, but I am often told that they couldn't survive without me. I literally took a second remote job this summer and they had no idea. I do have great soft skills, and in my opinion, I am a great PM when needed. I am just at a weird company that both thinks I'm invaluable and at the same time has no clue how to use me. I set up a complete PMO process and standards, including SDLC and the lot. I offered to provide weekly reports and was eventually told they didn't want them or want to follow any process. They just want me to keep them on track and report when I think things are going wrong. Story 8. This is probably not even close to the best, but it made me think about a cushy position for anyone. I work as a foreman for one of the country's top 10 home building companies. My crew builds trusses and only trusses, gables, valleys, and attic framing as well. And we have an inspector who comes by twice a year to do a quality check. He is allowed to stop by anytime he wants, unannounced. He's contracted by over 120 companies all over the country. His travel is paid for and he makes his own schedule. He is an expert in his field and everyone he interacts with on a daily basis respects his opinion. All he has to do is show up to construction sites and look at framing. Whether it passes or fails is irrelevant to him. His whole day may be a 15-minute walkthrough of a facility. He's paid ridiculously well and does absolutely zero work. It's 100% one of those jobs where you are paid for what you know, not for what you accomplish. Story 9. I'm making over $125,000 and I just went to Korean barbecue, got ice cream, and am now playing Pictionary with the team. I might watch a video essay and mess around in Blender later. Find a medium-sized business that's going through a lot of transitions and is desperate to retain staff. Management will spend a lot of time messing around with each other, leaving little to no time to give you work. Any work you do for them, they think is amazing. You ace your performance reviews and you can just rinse and repeat while making big money. Story 10. I had 2 weird assignments in the military where I did practically nothing. I worked at USA MRIID, which is the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Disease. They create and test immunizations there, and I worked on a human research ward. We would have studies where people would come in, take an immunization, and we'd have to monitor them for side effects. This was back in the 90s. I got to watch the entire O.J. Simpson trial because of this when Blockbuster was at its pinnacle. Our research ward had ping pong and pool tables and a few game consoles. A chef cooked only for the patients and we rented 8 movies per day for them. During our shift, we'd take a set of vitals once and then just pretty much watch over them. For the most part, when an immunization reaches human testing, you almost never see any real symptoms aside from a few studies. So, all shift, we would just have to interact with the patients. We would play ping pong, watch movies, and do whatever the patients were into. During the times when we didn't have any studies going on, we'd just go in the back through the airlocks and play spades all day. I remember days where we'd have pizza delivered just so we wouldn't have to stop playing spades. That job was the best, and the only reason I left it was to go to nursing school. I would have worked that job forever. After that, I went to Fort Jackson and the huge hospital they had there, but it was just closing off huge portions of it. I ended up working in a special care unit that had an ICU, same-day surgery, and a recovery room. I was put on the second shift, and all we had to do was take care of the last recovery room patients of the day. On most days, all of them were already finished and gone. The ICU almost never had a patient, so me and the other guy who worked that shift would alternate going home. If the patient was going to be admitted to the ICU, the person who stayed would call the other and we'd come in. So basically, for 3 years, I went home half the time I was supposed to work, and the days I did have to work, I mostly just watched TV. The internet was getting better by that time also, so I browsed the internet quite a bit, but it wasn't quite like it is today. Those were back-to-back assignments. Story 11. Being homeless has to be one of the hardest jobs in life. I do not recommend it. It takes a lot of experience and training to achieve this position, which consequently is not coveted by many. To the select few who seek to achieve such high goals and standards, I say, don't give up. One day you may find yourself at the top tier of the bottommost bracket, VIP homeless, a sure way to the hardest life. I host a pirate radio station, RH Plus, Radio Homeless, where we keep it up. It's a Bluetooth speaker aimed at a busy street and the adjacent Federal Express building. It doesn't pay, but it provides a platform to broadcast encouraging statements to the employed on behalf of all the other hardworking homeless people I have around me, of which there are none. Again, don't give up. Few positions ever open except for bent over at the waist. Being a successful member of society was a cakewalk compared to this. Okay, his inspiring message to the employed is great and all, but I'm worried about the confused FedEx delivery driver who keeps hearing, "Don't give up," from a bush every morning. Story 12. I know an accountant, and I'd say that it is the easiest job. It also adds nothing to the world. He exists simply to save corporations from having to pay their taxes properly, knowing all the loopholes. On top of that, they can write literally everything off, and who is going to report it? The guy gets a check for $500,000 from a single business. How much in taxes is he saving them by being that expensive? It's literally just sitting at a desk and knowing which systems to exploit for the most profit. He now owns an entire building and is becoming a corporate landlord. He is a literal plague on earth. Story 13. My job is one of the easiest I've ever had. It's a bit complicated to explain, so I'll break it down. There's a federal agency that doesn't specialize in security, but their federal buildings need to be secure. Since the agency doesn't want to deal with all the details, they contract private companies to manage security at their buildings across the country. These private companies bid for security contracts where the agency pays them to basically run the security department at various sites. These companies screen and hire guards who go through a background check with Homeland Security, the NSA, or whoever else is interested. It's such a complicated process that I genuinely don't know who actually investigated me, only that they went so deep they even talked to old neighbors I hadn't seen in years. Once the alphabet agencies give the green light and you pass your medical exam, you begin working at the site you applied for from the private company. Day to day, it feels like you just work for the federal agency because that's who's actually at your site, but technically you work for the private company that picks your wages, benefits, and schedule. Here's the kicker. The federal government is well known for taking care of its people, and in this case, that means you get taken care of too. My site also has a union, so the private contract company isn't skimming an unfair amount off the top of the federal contract, and a lot of it makes its way down to the guards. And the best part, I'm paid $30.50 an hour in an area with an average cost of living. I don't do much in terms of job duties. I sit in a secluded little guard hut, push a garage door opener when people come to get let in after I scan their badges to verify they have access, and I patrol the small site twice a shift, which takes about 30 minutes total. And that's it. I'm left to my own devices to keep myself entertained so I don't really get bored. It's $30.50 an hour to pretty much not be at home. As an added bonus, the site is pretty entertaining to watch. Story 14. I work from home as a cloud engineer. If programming is a black box and parallelism is another, the cloud is a third. You either work with super geniuses who create infrastructure from scratch that defines the internet, or with idiots who have no clue what it can do and have no business in the industry. The former was incredibly fulfilling and would have paved the way for the rest of my career, but the work was high stress with on-call hours and forced me to live where I didn't want to. I'm working for the latter now. I haven't gotten an assignment in months. My managers don't know enough to understand what I do or what I can do, but I just got a raise and a bonus, so... Story 15. There's a guy at my job who is basically the guy who knows everything about the warehouse software. His official title is some company jargon, but he corrects any issues with the warehouse management software we use. And for the most part, his job is to sit at a desk and wait for issues to arise. He's told me that he's bored as hell because issues are relatively few and far between, and he spends most of the night on Netflix or YouTube. It's a very laid-back job, but he had to have a lot of knowledge on the subject to get the position. I believe he makes about $60 an hour with a 40-hour workweek. My company doesn't dare get rid of him or cut his hours because if an issue arose, we'd be in trouble if he couldn't fix it. We recently implemented a new system, and he was excited to have a lot to do to make it work smoothly with everything, but now it's back to slow nights for him. Story 16. I'll throw my job into the mix even though I'm late to this thread. I'm a wholesaler in the car business. I supply used vehicles for dealerships to sell. It's long hours, but mostly windshield time. A lot of the job is hanging out with guys who do the same thing I do or with store managers. I have an office at the store, but I'm never there. I take a demo at the lot, use one of the company Amex cards, have an expense account, and hit the road. Fuel, hotels, and $60 a day for food are all paid for. I earn between $150,000 and $250,000 per year. It's all performance-based, so it depends on the year. However, as others have mentioned, it takes at least 10 years of experience to get into my role. You have to know how to do everything in the car business before they let you loose with the checkbook and no supervision. Alright, so he gets paid 6 figures to hang out with the guys, which is a level of professional broness that most people can only dream of. Story 17. Pretty much upper management in the majority of industries. The more technical tasks fall on their shoulders, but they're typically tied up in pointless meetings or running personal errands. When something gets messed up, they find someone else to blame. There are great executives and administrators out there who are not afraid to step in or step up when needed, but it's by no means a requirement most of the time, so most get lazy. Story 18. I'm a project manager, and if you land the right project, you can get paid a lot to do very little. I'm busy right now, but I recently came off a project that, once I had planned it, more or less ran itself. I had a very quiet 12 months where I mostly sat around playing video games and watching films. I was averaging one 30 to 60-minute meeting a day, and other than that, I just needed to write a couple of progress reports each week. Each report would just be a tweak of the previous one. Before that, I spent 2 years working on a project where I had more meetings, but I stacked them all between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. each day and was often finished by noon. I'm busy now though. I have 4 to 5 hours a day of meetings and plenty to do outside of those calls. It was a nice few years though. Story 19. A lot of tech people don't do much and make $200,000 to $300,000, but to get to that level, you need to go to a top school and get a lot of experience or find the right niche and then be very smart. I work in tech, and there are times when I barely worked and made about $120,000. Now I work pretty hard and make about $200,000, but there are people in my group who are senior to me who don't do anything and make more than I do. There are also people doing multiple tech jobs remotely. Some still work maybe 30 hours a week and make $300,000–$400,000, and some make over $500,000. Realistically, though, most people can't become engineers. You have to be good at math, and your brain has to be wired a certain way. Something like 50% of students drop out, so there are never enough engineers unless there's a recession or something along those lines. But even during a recession, we only have enough engineers due to H-1B visas. Story 20. A culinary director with Aramark or Compass at a state-funded correctional facility. I was the assistant director. The company literally gives you every recipe, the order guides, and the employees. All I had to do was supervise the staff they hired. My director didn't lift a finger. It was the same menu every day, the same budget, and the same lists. He rarely came to the office, and I rarely left it. All I did was make the schedule and do inventory once a month. I made $75,000, and he made $110,000. The culinary director only came in when there were meetings, and he knew the regional director would be stopping by. Story 21. Not high paying whatsoever, but a couple of years ago I got a seasonal second job at a Kroger. I was hired for the bakery, but the bakery manager was on some kind of leave, so I never saw her. Whoever in the department was tasked with training me basically said, "I can't train you, that's the manager's job." Yet somebody was still putting me on this schedule consistently. I spent that entire season getting paid to do literally nothing. I would clock in and just play on my phone in the break room until it was time to leave. Sometimes I would walk circles around the store and make the shelves look a little more organized if I got bored. Somehow, nobody ever noticed or questioned me. Story 22. I'm an engineer and I'm also apparently good at explaining things simply. My boss told me that they needed someone to present my division's project reports to executives who know nothing about how any of our stuff works. I get paid 50% more to do my same job, but I also organize and give a presentation to big shareholders and corporate snobs every quarter. I usually take 2 weeks to put the presentation together, and then I spend 2 hours or so giving it at a cushy lunch party. Easy money. And if you're enjoying the video so far or inspired by one of the stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 23. Depending on your definition of work, being a high-end music teacher is one of the easiest. I'm a private guitar teacher with over 40 years of experience and expertise. I guess you could call it work, but it doesn't really feel like it since music and guitar are my #1 life passions, and I would do it whether I was paid or not. It's very lucrative. My hourly rate is high, my schedule is booked, and 100% under my control. I take off all the time I want and still make 6 figures. The job itself is obviously fun almost all the time. It beats working for a living. Story 24. I work in a call center for a utility company. I work primarily from home and only have to go into the office for meetings. I also have a salary of around $100,000. I used to only do customer service in the office with forced overtime, and we would usually end the day with over 500 calls on hold. We only got about a 10-second break between calls, and we were busy all day. I managed to pass one easy test and got placed on the demolition team. Now I may take 5 to 10 calls a day that take about 10 minutes max, and then it requires me to fill out a 5-minute online form. I can't believe how easy my job is, and I can't believe the amount of money I make for doing it. Story 25. I know someone who does air traffic control at a major airport that is only used for helicopters at night. He gets food delivered for free and is only allowed to work a few hours, so he has a lot of breaks. During working hours, he sleeps in a sleeping bag he brings himself. When a helicopter comes in, an alarm rings. He asks them if they need assistance, which they never do, and then he leaves them to it. Before he leaves work, he gets breakfast delivered and earns $250,000 a year doing this a few nights a week. Unlike many other comments from people who are basically not doing their job, this is actually his job. He's encouraged to get as much rest as possible so he's sharp if anything does happen, and the limits are there for the same safety and liability reasons. However, becoming an air traffic controller is not easy by any means, and sponsored job positions are only given to the very best applicants. No experience is required, however, and it's a fully paid course. Story 26. I'm a hospice nurse. I make about $125,000 a year. I'm about to go to sleep and make $100 for being on call. If I get a call, it changes to 1.5x pay until the visit I have to make is over. I have about 3 days to chart any visit. I only get about 1 to 3 visits a day and spend all my drive time listening to music and Dungeons and Dragons podcasts like Legends of Avantris. Some days I get no visits and make a cool $500 just hanging out at home. Some days I get 5 to 6 visits, usually during the hot months of summer, and I want to pass away. My boss will usually throw an extra $300 into my check when it's a whole week like that because she loves me. I work 40 hours a week. Story 27. I earn $27,000 a year to play old school RuneScape in an office for 7 hours a day. I work as an administrator for a global logistics and materials management company, and I spend about an hour per shift inputting little snippets of information from paperwork that the other people in our warehouse hand me. It requires pretty much zero effort and just a little time out of each day. It might not be a massive amount of money, but it's more than enough for my life as a 29-year-old single guy. I walked into the job with zero experience, as I had been a chef and bartender for 13 years prior, and this was the entry-level pay bracket. I'm used to much harder work for much less pay due to my prior occupation. In terms of work done to money made, I imagine I'm in an extremely desirable spot. It certainly helps that I came in to fill the spot of 2 people who had been with the company for a long time and were being paid much more than my entry salary. I was able to do the job both of them had been doing for 20 years with one less person. My boss doesn't really care that I'm playing old school RuneScape because I get the work done when it comes in. Story 28. My sister and brother-in-law used to live in Saudi Arabia. He was working for a rich oil guy who had multiple luxury mega yachts and was responsible for ensuring they were all ready to go at a moment's notice. The guy would literally just turn up at the marina and want to go. But that would only happen about once a month. As my brother-in-law said, I get paid grotesquely well to do a few hours of work when the boats come back from a trip, and then sunbathe and read books for about a month. Story 29. This isn't a real answer, but it's a funny story. I worked for a company that had a contract with the local utilities company. We took care of all the street lights for them, and for a while I took calls and made reports when lights were out so they could be repaired. The utilities company took Good Friday off every year, but my company did not. They thought it was unfair for us to have a day off while the other workers at the utilities company did. So once a year, 4 of us would sit in the empty utilities building with the phones turned off and just read a book or surf the internet for a day with nothing to do. Story 30. I'm doing all right at the moment. My knowledge of whiskey, wine, and cocktails has me basically working as a creative consultant for a hospitality group. I'm getting paid for very little labor, but I am making money. Be skilled where others are not, and I don't mean some grand scheme, just be able to do things that other people can't do day to day. They've not realized that I became someone reliable as a colleague by doing all the DIY maintenance in the bars when I was working there. Story 31. To generalize, people get paid in relation to the amount of value they create for customers or employers and their level of uniqueness in providing those services. This is why hedge fund managers and professional athletes make millions and fry cooks do not. If you are not a talented athlete, then work with money, where the product you trade to the customer is money or a very liquid asset. Trade stocks, learn how to set lines for sportsbooks, learn how to manage and market an online casino, or get into the reinsurance business. Learn how the most successful companies in these niches do what they do, and copy them at first, then continue to learn. Ideally, you want to be in a position where your investments are earning money while you sleep. Story 32. Any mid-level manager with a competent team, you have a handful of meetings a week and 2-hour lunches that you can get the company to pay for half the time if you go with a client. It's nearly 6 figures without counting overtime just for scheduling tasks. The only bad parts are how quickly a lower-level manager can screw this up. The constant lies about problems and solutions to keep upper management from stripping your team down to the minimum, and the cloud of uncertainty that substances and alcohol can bring to your day. I've spent a decade in industrial construction. It's the best job that can quickly become the worst. Story 33. One big bank in Luxembourg used to pay, and it might still be ongoing, a very big salary to the manager of its branch in a Caribbean country because the local law demanded that the manager of the local branch must be a resident. Of course, he had a quote-unquote far-from-home bonus, a paid villa on the beach with 2 boats, and his job mainly consisted of receiving a few paper documents, slipping them into an envelope, and sending them to the headquarters in Luxembourg. There was no real work done in Luxembourg. He got the job by playing golf with the headquarters CEO. Story 34. I once worked a night shift at an IT service desk that sold 24/7 availability. We had pretty much no calls and no tickets on most nights, so at midnight, 3 a.m., and 6 a.m., I ran some basic checks to see if everything was still up and running, and for the rest of the night, I watched movies and played FIFA on my PlayStation. I was salaried and the hours counted double, so I only had to work 2 to 3 nights a week and had the rest of the week off. One time, a database server crashed at about 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning. It was completely quiet, and I had to spend the next 3 hours calling database administrators and managers to get them out of bed. So that's basically the reason I was there in the first place, but 99% of the time, it was the easiest job in the world. Story 35. I am very well paid compared to what I actually quote-unquote do. I have 14 people who work for me and do the actual work. What we do is highly regulated, but the regulations can't cover every circumstance. I get paid to make decisions on the hard stuff and essentially sign my name to exceptions and workarounds. If I say the risk is acceptable and something bad happens anyway, the people involved get to point to me as the expert and say, "We did what he said." The thing is, it took me over 30 years to get to where I am. Story 36. I don't know exactly what she did or does, but the wife of a friend of mine gets hired by startup companies in San Francisco and then gets a cut when the founder sells the company on top of a salary or hourly wage. She started working for a guy in the 90s who would start companies, build them up for a few years, and then sell them. Now he recommends her for all kinds of startup companies. She makes about $100,000 a year and only works about 50% of the year. Story 37. To be honest, being a general manager for an airport concessionaire is pretty solid. It pays between $75,000 and $100,000. Once you've built the infrastructure and have the right people in place, you don't do much but send reports. I hired someone to do all my product ordering for me. I hired someone to handle my logistics for me. I hired someone to facilitate all the training for me. Now all I do is flex my managerial muscles a couple of times a week when someone steps out of line, and we're solid. A 15% increase from last year's numbers is easy when the airport is in charge of driving traffic. The biggest issue is the Egyptians and Ethiopians who work for me. They feud like a Shakespearean tragedy and speak next to no English. Once I fire them and replace them all with multilinguals, it will be a cakewalk. Story 38. Get paid for what you know, not how much you do, was the key for me. Sometimes I have to be at a meeting and do most of the talking, and I have to perform as close to perfectly as possible because I'm the one person who understands and can explain. The rest of the time, I take naps, do hobbies, walk the dog, etc. I will literally take calls from C-level executives in the mid-afternoon while I'm walking the dog, and no one complains. This week, I had about 7 hours of productive work plus 2 hours of internal do the dishes or laundry while on mute type of meetings. I love my job. My worst days are 5 hours and often they're 30 to 60 minutes, but I have decades of expertise to draw on when needed. Story 39. HR does absolutely no work. In fact, they do the opposite of work by being a cancerous managerial class of parasitic organisms who are draining the livelihood from the working class from their faceless globalist masters while crushing productivity and actively destroying the actual functionality of every institution and organization in the modern world. They record and post themselves being proudly useless. The Hawk Tuah girl has contributed more net good to society, so whatever those people make. Story 40. I'm a project manager for a fire protection company. I'm also responsible for signing off on completed fire protection systems. If they don't work, then it's on me personally. Public liability insurance won't cover me. The job is a lot of waiting around, sometimes for weeks, waiting for various reports and organizing upcoming jobs. It's also a lot of networking with nice lunches and dinners with clients and stuff. I'm very well paid with $170,000 per annum plus completion bonuses. I'm lucky that I have a really good team that all know exactly what they're doing. They're also very well paid. I would say I spend about 80% of my workday just chatting with people and hanging out. I love my work, so I do enjoy the other 20%, which is a flurry of 14-hour days and massive commitment. But the company is awesome and leaves me alone. I deliver my projects on time and under budget, and I get to do whatever I want with my days. Nobody cares as long as I deliver. Story 41. Not a job, but here is an idea. Start a business and work hard, struggle, and fail until it is successful and reaches your profit goal. This may take a few years. Then systematize, outsource, and delegate absolutely everything. Get the business to a point where it can run without your direct day-to-day involvement. If you disappear for 4 weeks, the business has to be able to still run successfully. I am working on this myself, and I'm currently closing in on a 1-day-a-week check-in after 4 years of work. The upfront work can be a pain, but the payoff with time freedom can be special. Story 42. I'm the senior systems engineer at a large government contractor in DC. I don't make as much as some people here, but $245,000 a year isn't bad. That's before my military retirement, and I'm also 100% permanently and totally disabled from the military, so the VA cuts me a $4,000 non-taxable check every month, so that's like $7,000 a month for just being alive. I don't do a lot of quote-unquote engineering anymore. I mostly check others' work, break it, not for the sake of breaking it, but to expose flaws, and then report project statuses. But I have other engineers who are project managers who are really just compile the information they have into some slides. And I have an assistant for that too, lol. About 5 months ago, I was an E6 in the military. Life comes at you fast, man. Story 43. I work in a psychiatric ward in healthcare. It doesn't make a lot of money, but it pays very decently. For years, I worked in the healthcare slavery that is the hospital with awful working conditions, immense pressure from all sides, all kinds of bodily fluids, which never fazed me, but I just wanted to throw that in, and all the calls from the head chef to coax you to jump in for minimal extra money. Once I switched over to the psychiatric ward, it was a whole different world. It's a chill working environment so as not to trigger anyone, with considerate bosses, respectful behavior from basically everyone, and no backbreaking work, while the pay is better because it's considered a specialist job. There was always the latent danger of a situation escalating, but that very rarely happens outside of the forensic or closed addiction wards. Most of the time, you just take people's blood pressure, hand out medicine, have a talk here and there, and write it all down. The rest of the shift, you can browse your phone or become the best nurse by engaging your patients with cool activities that elevate their situation. If you have a knack for it, you can start a book reading club or even teach them to sit down for an hour by bringing a couple of Warhammer minis and paint to work. Story 44. Owner. This is a key concept in how our economy works. Yes, there are owners who are also CEOs, and that's a common way to become an owner by founding and building the company. But the time spent being a CEO is not what brings in the big bucks, it's having a stake in the company. Owning the company and hiring a CEO will net you similar benefits without the work. Stock is an abstraction of this idea. It's paying your way into the high-paying job of owner. Small amounts of stock only make you a small percentage owner, but with enough money, you can gain a large portion, and that will pay a lot. You might call this job quote-unquote investor and claim it takes savvy and work to get really rich this way. But just diversifying in an index fund is a pretty easy bet and often better than hiring more qualified investors. Furthermore, it's not the only type of owner. Real estate owners who rent their property make a ton. Sure, being a landlord isn't completely passive, but with commercial real estate and a management company working on it, it's very little work. Lots of celebrities get rich enough on their performance to be comfortable, but the truly rich ones are owners. They buy something like a sports team or a makeup line that is named after them. Ryan Reynolds bought Mint Mobile. It's not much work to make ads, especially if you're an actor already. Even consider Taylor Swift. It's not really her salary as a performer that's made her a billionaire. It's ownership of the intellectual property that's selling well. She could stop doing any work right now and she'd still make millions a year from being the owner of her intellectual property. The owner might have other jobs at a company, but they don't have to. The most highly compensated employee at any company also does the least work, and it's the owner. Story 45. I have some relatives that work for the US federal government who often talk about jobs in areas like accounting and project management that make over $100,000 and might have as much as 2 hours of actual work on a busy day. My aunt was talking about one older woman near retirement who made over $120,000 a year, and her only job was running some transactions every morning, which usually took no more than 20 minutes. She would then spend the rest of the day knitting at her desk. Story 46. My current job is as a project manager for a US-based Fortune 200 company. I have a permanent work-from-home position. I make 6 figures and do maybe 4 hours of actual work each week. I have my own office set up where I have 2 gaming monitors connected to my gaming laptop sitting directly in front of me. Then I have my work laptop sitting to one side with the volume turned up so I can hear if I get an email or a message. When I do, I handle it, then go back to my personal laptop. Most days I'm either playing video games, watching movies, browsing Reddit, staying for new certifications, or doing stuff around the house like laundry, dishes, cleaning rooms, and food prep. People on my team constantly say things like, "Man, this workload is insane." I've got the same and even more than some, but it's also so boring. However, they're paying me to mess around most days. Story 47. I had a job like this. I got paid $28 an hour working as an administrative assistant in a high school. It takes like 15 minutes to input grades and send truancy letters. Answering phone calls always resorts to just transferring them to the principal or school nurse. Literally nothing to do. I left the job because there's no work in the summer since the school is closed, and honestly, the environment was toxic. When you have that much free time at work, people want to start talking about their personal lives, and I don't like to talk about mine to my toxic coworkers. So I left. This job was the definition of money not buying happiness. Story 48. Call center management, not even something high up like operations or quality assurance, even being middle management can be lucrative. I've worked a few call center jobs and the people on the bottom absolutely get screwed over, overworked, and stressed out, but once you get to management, it's so easy. In my last call center job, I got promoted to management just because of how long I had been there. After the promotion, I was paid $50,000 per year to sit at home, listen to people do their job, fill out paperwork, and have the occasional web meeting. I spent more time playing video games and working out than anything else while on the clock. The funniest part to me is that when I gave my notice, they tried to offer me a promotion to stay because I was such a quote-unquote hard worker. I was so tempted to laugh and tell them how little work I actually did in a day. Story 49. Believe it or not, jobs usually pay what they do for a reason. You might be able to point out a particular instance of somebody having very little work to do and still earning a high salary, but there is a reason that the role itself pays that sort of salary regardless of the workload of any individual within that role. Furthermore, effort is not the only determining factor for salary. Digging ditches takes an incredible amount of physical effort, but makes far less than most white-collar jobs. Most of the high-salary jobs that you can point to as being low effort are going to have their own drawbacks or requirements that drive the salary up so high. Usually, this takes the form of rare knowledge or ultimate responsibility for making calls and living or dying by how correct those calls are. So you could find yourself in a low-effort job making a high salary but still sweating every damn day from the stress of wondering if you made a bad call and might lose it all. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.